Assalamu alaikum. I bet when you clicked on this video you were expecting Emin or Fareed, but it's your boy Jabran today. This video required a little bit of philosophy, which just so happens to be my specialty. Today I'm going to go over Ridwan's response and why he thinks Islam forbids pork and why this shows that Ridwan lacks basic reading comprehension skills and how he has no idea how moral reasoning works.
But they won't eat pork. But why is that so?
Please enlighten me, Ridwan.
Well, the shortest and quickest answer would be,
How about instead of giving us the shortest and quickest answer, just give us the correct one?
because the Quran says so. In chapter 16, verse 115, it says, "He has only forbidden to you dead animals, blood, the flesh of swine, and that which has been dedicated to other than Allah." If you ask for a reason, the Quran only says in chapter 6, verse 145, that it is impure.
Well, it's only been 1 minute in the video and AP has already contradicted himself. First, he states that the reason why the Quran forbids pork is because the Quran says so. But then, the very next second, he quotes an ayah that tells you the reason why pork is forbidden is because it is impure.
There's no other reason given, and a Muslim is supposed to accept the Quran's rulings without any questions and say, "We hear and we obey." Sounds very mindless, doesn't it?
Let's concede for a moment and agree that there is no deep meaning behind this prohibition. Does it therefore follow that it is morally permissible to eat pork? Of course not. Any system of ethics is going to have moral judgments that are simply given. As atheist professor Walter Synod Armstrong explains, the most common way to choose among moral theories is to test how well they cohere with our intuitions or consider judgments about what is morally wrong and right. What Armstrong is trying to tell us here is that most ethicists formulate their moral theories based on their intuitive judgments. What exactly is the intuition? Intuition is the knowledge we have that doesn't require any arguments or evidence or proofs. Likewise, the Islamic ethicist is doing nothing different than what the secular ethicist is doing. It's just that instead of relying purely on our intuition, the Islamic ethicist is also adding divine commandments into the picture. Thus, Ridwan's criticism is not only aimed at Islamic ethics, but ethics in general.
Isn't it obvious? It is forbidden because pigs are very dirty, filthy animals.
Ridwan later goes on to say that the reason why the Quran forbids pork is because they are unsanitary animals. Of course, he never provides any proof, or scholarly material, or anything to back this claim up. Now, the only thing Ridwan uses to actually support his material is a Zakir Naik video and an article that he doesn't even provide citations to. Now, it needs to be said here that Zakir Naik is not an Islamic scholar, or a philosopher, or an ethicist. What Ridwan fails to understand is that popularity does not mean you are knowledgeable or an authority on the subject. This is a basic truth that Ridwan fails to learn. Now, the best case, Ridwan, you can possibly make is that the impurity in the Quran must refer to the uncleanliness of the animal. But the interesting thing about language is that it's very nuanced and that one word can have multiple different meanings depending upon the context. To give one relevant example, take the phrase "a dirty book." There are two possible meanings it could refer to. One is to refer to the uncleanliness of the book, and the other is to refer to the immoral content in the book. Now, suppose a friend came to you and said, "I found this dirty book that I spent the whole afternoon cleaning." Now, it is very obvious given the context that I am referring to the physical characteristics of the book. Likewise, we have to look at the other verses in the Quran that contain the same word to get a better idea of the type of impurity the Quran is referring to. And the same word is used again, and it's translated as follows: "O you who have believed, indeed intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars to other than Allah, and divining arrows are but defilement from the works of Satan. So avoid it so that you may be successful." Notice that both gambling and fortune-telling are described as being impure. The same Arabic word is being used here. Now, common sense tells us that these two things are not consistent with AP's interpretation of impurity, and hence AP's interpretation falls flat in his face once you start applying that interpretation to verses outside the one he quotes. In fact, let us look at the academic literature on the subject. David Frankberg quotes that Judaism and Islam have a similar understanding of impurity. There are two ways in which something can be impure. One is the understanding that AP has, which is to say that something is impure because of some intrinsic physical impurity, such as blood and urine. The other way something can be impure is based off of its sinful nature. It is the second type of uncleanliness that things like eating pork, gambling, and fortune telling fall under. Now, AP wants to know why we should obey this prohibition on pork. To answer this question, we have to understand the 5 maxims of the sharia. The 5 maxims are the preservation of deen, the preservation of life, the preservation of property, the preservation of progeny, and the preservation of the intellect. Now, the prohibition of pork is there to preserve the deen. So what exactly does deen mean? The Arabic root of deen can be translated as indebtedness. Essentially, mankind, having been brought into existence with his rational faculties, is indebted to his creator. As Muslim philosopher Al-Attas explains, he is himself the debt to be returned to the owner, and returning the debt means to give himself up in service or khidmah to his lord and master, to abase himself before him, and consciously enslave himself before God in order to fulfill his commands and obligations. Not to mention, we are bound by a duty to obey him due to our covenant with Allah, which Allah refers to in chapter 7, verse 172, which Al-Attas comments on saying, in acknowledgement of God's lordship, it has sealed a covenant with God. Mankind has essentially made a covenant with Allah that we would worship him and obey him alone. One of the aims of the Sharia is to make sure we uphold our covenant with Allah. That is why these commandments may seem baseless when you try to understand it from a secular point of view, but once you understand the context behind these laws, then suddenly statements like we hear and we obey don't sound very mindless. It is our indebtedness to our Creator and our love of Him that we prohibit ourselves from eating pork. Now, it is interesting to note that the same objection that AP raises against Islam can be applied to both Judaism and Christianity. If these laws don't make any sense under Islam, then they don't make sense under the Judeo-Christian view, since the Torah also claims that pigs are unclean. Anticipating this objection, here is AP's response.
The Bible says that eating pork is forbidden. But Christians are not bound by the prohibitions of the Old Testament. Christians are bound by the New Testament, by which Jesus said upon the question why he eats defiled food, "Are you so dull? Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. What comes out of a person is what defiles them."
Now, I have 2 responses to AP's response. It is virtually agreed upon by all Christians that God cannot make an error, and since the Torah is from God, and God has claimed that pigs are unclean, then if that is a mistake, then Christianity cannot be true. And second, the quote that Ridwan uses does not deny that pork is unclean. And so if Jesus is God, and God is agreeing that pork is unclean, and since pork is not unclean, then God has made an error. Thus, if you are a Christian or a Jew, then you should also be against AP's argument.
I am no Christian, but again I have to agree with Jesus here.
Oh, so you agree with Jesus that pork is unclean? Well, that was quick. Thanks for wasting all of our time.
They often ignore, mostly due to ignorance, that pork is not the only thing that is forbidden in the Bible. The Bible prohibits the eating of animals that either only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof. Chewing the cud means chewing food that comes back from the stomach, as cows do, for example. The Bible then lists the camel, the hyrax, and the rabbit. Then it also lists the pig. It goes on counting birds, insects, and sea animals. But let's focus on the main animals listed first. Islam allows camel and rabbits, although the Bible forbids it. The Quran only bans the pig selectively. Many Muslims of our time are entirely unaware of this. Well, we still don't have a reason why Islam forbids pork and calls pigs unclean. There is no reason.
And finally, AP claims that Islam does not provide a reason as to why Jewish dietary laws are different from the Islamic one. But this is just plain false. The Quran does give us a reason in chapter 6, verse 146, which states that it was their disobedience to God that led them to having stricter dietary laws than the ones the Muslims have, which only further demonstrates that Ridwan has no idea what he is talking about and lacks any basic reading comprehension skills. And I guess that is it for today. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.